I was married to a pastor, respected, admired, and loved by many. But I fell in love with my psychologist, and it wasn't all in my head. If you've ever lusted after someone, you shouldn't have. Subscribe to the channel and tell me where you're watching from. My name is Elisa. I'm 34 years old. I've been married for 8 years to a good man, a pastor. We have 2 children. I'm the worship coordinator at our church. And to anyone who looks from the outside, my life is the kind of story people preach about, but they don't see what's behind the pulpit, smiles or Sunday harmonies. They don't see the silence at night, the emotional absence disguised as ministry, or the ache I carry when I wake up every morning knowing I'm invisible in my own marriage. I didn't fall for my psychologist because I wanted to. I fell because he saw me, because I could speak and not be redirected to a Bible verse. Because when I cried in those sessions, he didn't pray over me. He listened, and I was starving for that. I didn't plan it. I didn't flirt. I didn't seduce. I just spoke. And somehow, those sessions became my world, my escape, my place of oxygen. I started dressing better for them, wearing perfume, hoping he'd notice. Not because I was hunting, but because I missed being seen. I missed being a woman. I started recording these audio diaries because I couldn't carry this alone anymore. Because this thing that grew inside me didn't feel like just emotion. It felt like betrayal. Not just to my husband, but to myself. I felt alive in those sessions, and then ashamed, and then addicted. And that's what nobody talks about. The addiction to being heard, to being emotionally wanted. That's how it started, not with a kiss, not with a touch, but with a gaze that lingered too long, with a question too personal, with a laugh that meant too much. And once that line was crossed, even if only in my mind I was someone else, and I hated it, and I loved it, and I kept going back. I told myself I could stop, that it was harmless, that it was just a phase. But every time I left his office, I'd sit in my car and feel like I was cheating, even if no one ever touched anyone. I was losing myself. I was hiding behind smiles at church while holding secrets that were never supposed to be mine. And every time Daniel, my husband, looked at me with those tired, soft eyes, I wanted to scream, "See me?" But he was always serving, always saving others. And I stopped being part of the people he came home to save. I became just the background, the helper, the support system, and someone else became the one who listened when I broke. I didn't want to fall, but I fell. Not with my body, but with my soul. And that's what destroyed everything. Because once your soul belongs to someone else, your marriage is just a house. It started with a chair, a simple chair in a quiet room where I could finally breathe. At first, therapy felt like an obligation, something my husband suggested after my burnout last year. But over time, those sessions with Lucas, the psychologist our church recommended, became something else. He wasn't just helping me process my exhaustion. He was helping me feel again. And not like Pastor Daniel's wife, but like Elisa. Just Elisa. He listened, really listened. Not to fix, not to quote scripture, not to diagnose, just to hold space, and I had no idea how much I needed that. The first time I caught myself looking forward to our sessions, I felt a sting of guilt. It was subtle. I told myself it was just the relief of having a place to decompress. But then I started choosing my clothes more carefully on therapy days. I sprayed perfume before leaving home. I checked my reflection twice before walking into his office. Not because I wanted to seduce but because I wanted to feel worthy of being noticed. I remember one afternoon he asked, "What's something you haven't told anyone yet?" And I said, without thinking, that I feel more alive here than I do at home. We both froze. He didn't lean in. He didn't act inappropriately. But the silence between us changed. The air changed. After that, everything was different. I started replaying our conversations in my head, smiling at things he said, wondering if he thought about me after I left. I justified it. Told myself it was just emotional transfer, something that happens in therapy. But I knew, deep down, I knew. I was feeding a hunger I hadn't admitted existed. Not with physical touch, but with imagination, with longing, with stolen glances and pauses. That said too much. And yet, I didn't stop. I craved the safety, the connection, the way I felt seen. And in that emotional craving, a different kind of lust was born. Not for sex, but for soul intimacy. For being chosen in the silence, for being wanted in a room where nothing physical ever happened. And yet, everything changed. I started writing letters I never intended to send. Letters where I told Lucas things I couldn't even admit to myself. Phrases like, "When you say my name, it sounds like a song I forgot I loved," or "I feel more at home in your silence than in my own house." At night, I'd lay in bed beside Daniel, hearing him breathe, feeling the weight of his devotion, present, predictable. But in my mind, I wasn't there. I was in that office, that chair, that voice. I saved some of Lucas's voice messages, the ones he sent to confirm appointments or give neutral feedback. I played them late at night, telling myself it was innocent, but it wasn't. I had turned his tone into poetry, his care into intimacy. My heart was building a version of him that didn't exist, at least not for me. And yet, I loved that version. I looked forward to therapy not to heal, but to feel alive. I started choosing clothes more carefully. A shade of lipstick Daniel never noticed. A perfume I knew would linger in small rooms. These weren't accidents. They were quiet calls for attention, and I hated myself for it. I was becoming someone else. But where Sai liked being her, I began to measure the days by how close they were to our sessions. Mondays were heavy. Wednesdays were easier. Fridays, I almost smiled. I fantasized not about a future with him, but about him seeing me, seeing my struggle, my silence, my loneliness. I craved emotional touch, not physical, but sometimes the boundary blurred. One night, I dreamt of him holding my wrist during a panic attack. Just that, his hand on my wrist. But I woke up sweating, ashamed. I started pulling away from Daniel. Our conversations became surface level. Our prayers, robotic. He didn't notice at first. He just assumed I was tired. And I was tired of pretending I wasn't starving for something I couldn't name. I began journaling in code phrases. Only I would understand. Breathe slower today meant I had heard his voice. Stay quiet during worship meant I was daydreaming during rehearsal. It was getting dangerous. I knew it, and yet I didn't stop. Lucas wasn't just a therapist anymore. He was a metaphor, a symbol of who I used to be before ministry, before marriage, before motherhood. A version of me that still felt curious, worthy, chosen. My mind began inventing stories, imagining him asking how I really felt, imagining what would happen if I confessed. I knew it would never be real, but it was already real enough to haunt me. Daniel started noticing subtle things. I forgot dates. I looked distant. I smiled less. He'd ask, "Are you okay?" And I'd nod. But my silence screamed louder every day. In church, I'd close my eyes during worship, not in adoration, but in escape. I stopped asking God for healing. I started asking for silence, for time, for a way out. But the truth is, I didn't want out. I wanted more of that feeling of being noticed, of not being needed but wanted. I was addicted, and my drug was attention, selective, gentle, male attention. One evening after rehearsal, I sat in my car and listened to an old voice note he had sent about scheduling. Just that. A simple, "Hi Elisa, confirming tomorrow's session at 4 p.m. I replayed it 6 times. I memorized the pauses, the tone, the way he said my name. And for the first time, I realized I had crossed a line, not out loud, not physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And I had no idea how to walk back. But I wasn't ready to stop. I still had questions I wanted him to ask. Still had moments I wanted him to witness. Still had a version of myself I didn't want to kill just yet. I was drowning in something I thought was healing. And I didn't know if I wanted to be rescued, because sometimes emotional sin feels safer than facing a cold reality. Sometimes the idea of someone who sees you feels more holy than the marriage that ignores you. But that's the lie. That's the trap. And I was deep in it. He found one of the letters. I thought I had deleted everything, hidden every trace of what I felt. But I forgot the one I had written in a moment of weakness. A letter I never sent, folded deep inside an old journal I used to take to church. I came home from the supermarket, keys in hand, humming the chorus of the worship set list, and I saw him sitting on the edge of the bed holding something. His face was unreadable. Not angry, not cold, just still. That kind of stillness that comes right before a storm you can't escape. "What is this?" he asked, holding the paper like it was toxic. I froze. I didn't recognize it at first. And then he read it aloud, every word I had written, every secret, every thought I believed I would carry alone to the grave. When you look into my eyes, I forget I'm married. My knees went weak. My mouth went dry. The air felt thick and heavy. I opened it to speak, to explain, but there was nothing left to explain. He had read it. He knew. The emotional affair, the fantasies, the lies I told with my silence. "So all this time," he said quietly, "you were married to me. But giving your heart to someone else?" I just sat down. I couldn't cry. My whole body felt hollow. I thought about how many times I had stood beside him at church, singing about faithfulness, while holding back my own betrayal. The shame wasn't just in what I did, it was in who. I had become a woman split in half, loyal in appearance, but bankrupt inside. I told him the truth, everything. I confessed more than he had read, things he would have never known unless I spoke. It was the first time in years that I said exactly what I felt, without filters. And it was the first time I realized I had crossed every line that matters, not physically, but in ways just as deep, just as devastating. Because lust doesn't need a bed to destroy a covenant sometimes. It just needs a wounded heart. and the wrong pair of ears. He asked me to leave, not in anger, not to punish me, but because he said he couldn't sleep with my presence echoing through the house like a ghost. I packed my things in silence, just a suitcase, left my Bible on the dresser, the worship notes on the desk. I drove to my sister's place and didn't even tell the kids the real reason. I just said, "Mommy needs a little time to rest." I cried the first night, the second, and by the third I didn't even cry. I just stared at the ceiling, wondering how. I let myself become the kind of woman I used to warn others about. The church elders called, not to condemn, but to act. I was removed from the leadership team. No more leading worship. No more speaking at women's retreats. My name vanished from the roster without a whisper. The psychologist, he stepped down voluntarily, they said. But we both knew it wasn't a coincidence. I never saw him again. Never sent the letter. Never replied to the apology. He emailed me just one line. I should have kept the boundary. My husband started therapy. Alone, he told me over the phone one evening, "I need to process this with God, not with you." And I understood, because I had shattered something deeper than trust. I had shattered our identity, our image, our altar. We used to pray together at night, hand in hand, forehead to forehead. Now he can't even look me in the eye, he told me. He still loves me. But that love doesn't feel safe right now, he said. "I don't know if I'll ever trust you again. I'm trying, but I can't promise anything." And those words, they haunt me more than silence would, because they carry truth, the kind of truth that makes you sit still and realize some wounds don't bleed, they echo. I walk through days like a shadow of myself. I still sing, but in private. I still pray, but with fewer words. And I still hope not for the marriage I had, but for the woman I still might become. I started therapy again, this time with a woman. I needed safety. I needed no possibility of confusion. On the first day, she asked me, "What were you really looking for?" I didn't know how to answer. I thought it was love. Then I thought it was validation. But the truth? I was hungry, starved for presence, for affection, for eyes that really saw me not as a pastor's wife, not as a leader, not as someone who should already have it all together. I wanted someone to pause when I spoke, someone to listen without fixing, someone who made me feel like I wasn't invisible. And I mistook that hunger for romance, for love, for permission to cross lines I never thought I'd cross. Now I know emotional lust is real. It's just as invasive, just as corrosive, just as addictive as any physical betrayal. Because it starts in the mind, then it roots in the heart, and by the time it reaches your skin, your soul is already fractured. I'm not healed yet. I still cry in the shower, still find myself replaying old fantasies and then praying them away. Still feel that ache when I see happy couples holding hands at church, but I stopped lying to myself. I stopped romanticizing what happened. It wasn't love. It was escape. It wasn't connection. It was confusion, and healing can't grow where denial lives. Now I'm learning to sit with discomfort, to ask for help before I explode, to tell God the whole truth, even the parts I wish weren't real. Some days I still feel unworthy of grace, but I speak truth over that lie, because God doesn't redeem perfect stories. He redeems broken people. I don't know what my marriage will look like in a year, or if the church will ever look at me the same, but I do know this. I'm rebuilding not the image, not the title, but the woman I buried underneath all the expectations. I'm choosing to live in the light even when it burns, because only light reveals what needs to be healed. And you, have you ever fallen for someone without ever touching them? Have you ever stared too long, waited too eagerly for a message? Replayed a voice in your head that wasn't your partner's? Emotional lust is sneaky. It doesn't knock down the door. It seeps in through the cracks of unmet needs. It begins with admiration, evolves into anticipation, and before you know it, you're addicted to a version of love that only exists in your mind. I know because I lived it. I thought I was just being human, just needing someone to talk to, just enjoying a conversation. But somewhere along the way, I started to dress differently on therapy days. I started to measure my worth by the way he looked at me. I started to crave those sessions like someone craves air after drowning. And I justified it. I said, at least I didn't sleep with him. I told myself I was still loyal because I never touched, but betrayal doesn't always happen between bodies. Sometimes it happens in the invisible places, in glances, in thoughts, in hopes. If you're listening to this and you're in that space right now, please hear me. Confess. Pull yourself out before you sink deeper. That attention you're craving, it might cost you your marriage. That connection that feels innocent, it may be the spark that burns down everything you've built. You can be married and lonely. You can be spiritual and empty, but that doesn't mean you need to search for comfort where it's not safe. I used to think emotional affairs weren't real, that they were just made-up fears, but now I know they're real and they're devastating. So please, Talk to someone. Shine light on the secret. Bring your weakness to the surface. Healing begins where pretending ends. And even if you think it's too late, it's not. God still restores. But it starts with truth. And sometimes, that truth begins with one terrifying but freeing sentence. I crossed a line, and I need help. Don't wait for the explosion. Run to grace before the fire gets to your soul. You're not alone. You're not beyond redemption. But you are responsible for what you feed when no one's watching. This is my confession. I was unfaithful without ever taking my clothes off. If you've ever had feelings for someone who wasn't your partner, look, that lingered. A conversation that stuck in your head for days. A moment that triggered something you couldn't explain then, you know what I mean? It's a war that no one sees. A fight that doesn't leave bruises on your body, but scars on your soul. I thought I was strong. I thought I was spiritual enough, disciplined enough, married enough to never feel this kind of attraction. But it happened, and when I tried to silence it, it got louder. When I tried to pray it away, I realized that prayer without truth is just performance. I'm not here to place blame. I'm here to expose what we hide so well behind church robes and saintly smiles. This channel is not a courtroom. It's a shelter, a place for people like me and maybe like you to admit what's destroying us before it destroys everything around us. If you've ever been through something like this, tell us about it. Leave a comment. No masks here, just honesty, healing, and hope. Here, we don't pretend to be saints. We've learned to bleed together and still believe in redemption. What about you? How long will you keep saying I'm okay when deep down you're falling apart? You don't have to carry this alone. You don't have to keep playing a role. Freedom begins when the lie ends, and sometimes that begins with one brave step, telling the truth. You're safe here, and never forget, your story can help others get back on their feet. Keep watching this video that's playing on your screen.